Inside and out, everyone you know has got them. Your mom and dad and all your friends. Enjoy your scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
Today on Bearing Scars, we're going to talk about a subject that everyone who is listening to this podcast will remember as front and center in the zeitgeist for several years, persisting in a lesser form even to this day. I'm talking about the phenomenon of being canceled. What for centuries was confined to local ostracization via scarlet letters and sideways glances morphed with the advent of journalistic television into national water cooler talk the morning after a well-researched topic was covered. Yet when social media began to take the forefront, influence profiteers began to peddle every instance of perceived wrongdoing in an attempt to increase their social clout. They splashed, "Look at me, I'm better than this person" posts across their own timelines in an attempt to make themselves more viral. Now don't get me wrong, there are people, myself included, who have deserved to have their worst moments in life broadcast. But as people began to realize there's a profit to be made, either politically, pecuniarily, or via publicity, then the gloves came off. And at what price for the rest of our society? Has this exploitation phenomenon driven everyone underground for fear one slip, one drunken night, one irreversible social media post, one bad joke, one addiction, or one event would eventually turn someone's undeniable path into a lifetime as an undesirable? Today on Bearing Scars, we're discussing this issue with Tim Kelley. Throughout his career, Tim has dealt with the science of math and the definite. His education includes a mathematics degree from MIT, and his career included being a senior-level executive at Oracle, as well as an officer commanding sailors in the U.S. Navy. But as he transitioned his career, he began to notice good people being harmed by these profiteers. After his own attempted cancellation by a colleague and, unfortunately, a relative, Tim changed his career focus to helping those who have had attempted cancellations on their own careers or their own companies. Before you ask, no, Tim has never advised me on these issues, and we've only spoken twice. But Tim has advised, get this, 3 presidential candidates, governors, and major international CEOs of companies that you know on how to combat cancel culture. How Tim advises these leaders is the focus of today's episode of Bearing Scars. Tim Kelley, welcome to Bearing Scars. How are you doing, sir?
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here. Brought my scars.
We've all got them. We've all got scars. It's just the gravity and the type of scars that each of us have. And we're
the depth, the color, and how long it took for them to heal, if they have.
Well, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, isn't it? We're going to talk a little bit about how leaders can heal the scars that they have and always have them there, but they can heal themselves and then perhaps maybe even allow other people to see how they've healed through the process. So it's something we're going to talk about today. But we always start every single episode by asking our guests one very simple question. What did you want to be when you grew up? So Tim Kelley, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an astronaut.
Oh.
And you know, the usual thing with the little kid mommy reading me books about going to space and stuff. But it lasted until I was 25, Michael.
Oh my goodness.
I was still kind of angling to get into, pilot stuff after I graduated from school. Debating whether I wanted to go that route because that would be my last chance of becoming an astronaut. It was close.
Well, when you're in, you grew up in the 60s as a child of the 60s. That's right. At the Apollo program was going on. Yep. We had the moon landing in July of 69.
Oh, yeah.
So
I was a kid watching live on TV when Neil Armstrong jumped off the step.
So you want to be an astronaut. You're going through high school. What kind of cliques are you in high school?
I was the king of the computer lab, and that was actually an official title.
So you were in the nerd clique, all right?
I ran the nerd clique. Mm-hmm. I ran the Dungeons and Dragons after school.
Right.
I was the man. Mm-hmm. And so there were the cool kids. We were not the cool kids. Mm-hmm. But there were plenty of people who like us. I remember girls bringing us brownies and stuff, mm-hmm. Because they said, and they're probably right, they would not have passed their computer class without our help. Funny. Like we were very helpful, and we would help people debug their programs and this kind of stuff. I mean, we're talking punch cards.
Right.
Like, I mean, this was ancient.
What part of the country is this?
So this was New York City. Okay. I strangely was born in Tokyo. I'm actually technically an immigrant, mm-hmm. although I have U.S. citizenship from birth. It would be debatable whether I could be president or not, mm-hmm. but I've never had any other citizenship, and I have a State Department birth certificate. But I moved to New York City when I was like a year and a half. I have mm-hmm. no memories of Japan, and grew up in New York City.
So one of your parents was in the military or in the diplomatic corps?
No, Dad was a minister, and that was the first church he got assigned to. He was the assistant minister at an interdenominational English-speaking church in Tokyo in like 1961.
I'm assuming because you were the king of the computer lab, two things, that you had phenomenal grades, right?
I did. Mm-hmm. I did great. There were people who got better grades than I, but I took more classes and harder classes than anyone else. So I like to think that counts for something.
The ones that mattered. Yeah.
I took like all AP classes, and I would just take classes from like 7 in the morning until 5 with no lunch break.
What sports did you play?
I ran cross country. Right. I could run 6-minute miles.
At what point did you realize I'm not going to be an astronaut? Maybe I need to find an alternative career path.
That was around 25 mm-hmm. After I graduated college.
So you went to college thinking that potentially you could be an astronaut?
Oh, absolutely. I chose majors with that in mind. I did not give up on that dream, and brought it up in my college interview mm-hmm. with the interviewer from MIT. But so I picked math and electrical engineering specifically because I knew they would play well mm-hmm. on an astronaut application.
But alas,
yeah,
you didn't become an
that
astronaut.
Did not work out. No. Around 21, going into my junior year, I had what I now, looking back, think of as a purpose crisis.
Yeah.
Basically all the motivation left the building, and this is completely self-inflicted. And I had no idea what was going on, like really none. I did not know why. All I knew was that I couldn't get myself to study. I couldn't get myself to go to class. I could eat and sleep and play foosball mm-hmm. and argue with my fraternity brothers, but I could not get myself to do the schoolwork. And things just got worse and worse and worse. And so the spring semester of my junior year, I dropped all my classes.
What did you tell your parents?
I don't even remember what I told my parents. I have no recollection of that whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I remember the conversation with the school because it went so much better than I'd imagined. Right. And I remember the conversation with the Navy because it went so much worse than I'd imagined.
Tell me about the conversation with the Navy. What did they say? Because you were in ROTC, right?
Correct. And this was all part of the plan, mm-hmm. right? We're going to major in electrical engineering and math, Navy ROTC. Why Navy ROTC? Become a Marine pilot. Why a Marine pilot? Marines have the fewest astronauts, but they have the largest number of astronauts compared to the number of pilots they have. I was doing the math, and it's like, the raw numbers don't tell the story. It's where are your percentage odds better? Marine Corps.
Right.
So I never actually made it into the Marine Corps. There was a Marine Corps officer there who didn't like me and prevented me from getting into the Marine Corps, blocked me.
Any reason that he gave?
Well, I know why it was, which is the first time when I first showed up at the office to join the Navy ROTC, I had long hair and I had an earring in. Mm-hmm. No. This guy saw that never have this guy in my Marine Corps. That was his attitude. Blocked my path. Anyway, so they were like, well, what do you mean you're taking time off? I said, well, my grades are terrible. I need a break.
And the Navy, of course, said, we totally understand. We'll let you put a pause on your process and then come back and just pick up exactly where you left off.
We see that you're having a mental health challenge, and we're compassionate to that. And no, they recalled me involuntarily to active duty and shipped me off to boot camp to swab decks. That was their response. And I was used as a cautionary tale in that ROTC detachment for years afterward.
You enter the Navy. Instead of going in the astronaut path, because of the path you were taking, they said, you know what? We're going to make you an E2. So for those of you
we're going to demote you all the way down to the bottom, like 9 or 10 ranks.
Wow.
That was a very, very long way to move down the food chain.
So this is a pretty impactful decision that you made. You're in the Navy. They say, well, welcome back, son. Because you're a go-getter, and I always say alphas are going to alpha no matter what their circumstances are. You are the best deck swabber they have on the ship. Tell me about your path.
By far, not even close. The minute I walked into boot camp, they put me in charge of the whole unit of 80-something guys. Right. They were like, oh, look at this guy. There's our new recruit chief petty officer. Congratulations, you're in charge. I mean, like, literally the moment I walked in.
That's nice.
They just took one look at me, and then that was that. And so I spent the entire boot camp in charge of all the other recruits, which is a terrible job because you have no authority whatsoever.
Right.
And so I did that. And then when I got to the ship, all the chiefs on the ship wanted me in their division. And I got out of that. I got out of deck swabbing in record time. They actually had to, I was on board for 3 weeks when I got Sailor of the Month.
Right.
So I got out of there into navigation in the minimum legal permitted amount of time, which was 9 months. And started shooting stars and doing charts and all that navigation stuff, which I loved, and did that for the next 10, 12 years, something.
And then you elevate to what's called in the military a warrant officer, which is...
That's right. I was a chief first, which E7 in the Navy is a very big... They have an initiation, and you change uniforms. It's a whole big deal. Did that, became a warrant officer, and then became a commanding officer as a warrant officer, which meant, you're going to love this, I had a unit of 120 guys. This was an amphibious assault craft unit, and there were 5 other officers in the unit. I was the commanding officer, and every single one of them outranked me. So if I would meet them on the way to lunch, I would salute them, even though I signed their fitness reports, right?
That's amazing. That's a level of trust that the folks who were above you had in you. I mean, there was a level of trust there. So there's competence on your side. You're clearly a smart guy. You went to MIT. You didn't graduate yet at this point, but did you eventually go back?
I eventually went back partway through my enlisted career when I was like a E4 or 5 around there somewhere. I went back to MIT and did 3 semesters and finished. And at that point, I was very goal focused. Like, I'm getting a degree. What is the shortest path to a degree? At this point, the astronaut thing was off the table, right? There was no piloting in my future. Right. So I just powered through and got a math degree, because that was, for me, a theoretical math degree, which for many people would melt their brains. That was the easiest thing for me personally to do that would get me a degree.
Trajectory going great. I mean, not to space, but your trajectory is still going pretty darn well. And then they make you a full commissioned officer in the Navy.
Correct.
And how did that happen?
That's right. Basically, they have these sort of narrow doors that you can get through to get from like chief to warrant officer, or from enlisted to full officer. And they sort of clip your wings a little bit, like you have to stick to your specialty. You can't just do whatever. And so because I'd come up through deck swabbing and navigation, all that, I was restricted to deck-related positions. It had to be navigation or signaling or deck-related. But I didn't care. That was my happy place anyway. And so what they do is every year they would have a board that would meet to review hundreds of applications to give away 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 promotions. And then when I became a full officer, I was the only one in the whole Navy who got promoted in my specialty that year. And the reason was because I'd already been a commanding officer. And so that made it incontestable, right? Because they're trying to evaluate someone's potential for command. And I had like 2-3 fitness reports showing I'd done a great job as a commanding officer. No one else stood a chance, basically.
You were in the Navy for how many years? More than 20 years?
23 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
23 years. And since you were reserve for most of it, what was your other job? What was your job at home?
I was at Oracle being a software engineer and becoming a manager of other software engineers and working my way up the corporate food chain. At the same time, I was working my way up the Navy food chain. I got as high as 2 levels below Larry Ellison.
That's a pretty good level. Yeah.
That's a pretty good level. Now, there were fewer levels then than there are now, but still, that's very close to the stratosphere.
We're talking about the 90s here, right?
Yep.
When you were in Oracle, when the internet was just, I mean, as a software engineer, the internet was really in its infancy.
Absolutely.
In the late 80s, early 90s, into the 90s. So you really helped to, without building you up too much, build the internet.
I was working on databases, but they're a big part of how everything works. And back then, if you called up your bank or something and you didn't have your customer ID, they couldn't help you. That's how it worked back then. And so it was really Oracle that changed that. Now there's, you have lots of competitors and lots of databases. I mean, you can get an open source, you can download an open source database from the network if you want, right? That's completely free. But they were the first, right, who created what's called a relational database that allows you to look stuff up based on anything. Show me all the people where the second letter of their middle name is Q, you know, like this sort of thing. And so it changed the world in a way that we're very lazy and unaware of, and therefore not informed enough to be grateful for.
You're one of the top executives, pretty much, at Oracle, and then you decide to work with some friends and open your own business. What kind of business was that, and how did that all come about?
It was database consulting. So we with different kind of database. So the ones we were talking about, that's where everybody keeps all their data. But it's hard to get the data out to make decisions based on it. So we were working on other sorts of decisions that like the finance geeks use in huge. Our first client was HP. Like if you're HP and you want to know where the money's coming from and where the money's going, it's not actually that easy a question to answer. So we were the ones as consultants working with them to set up these sort of specialized databases that allowed them to have a window into what was actually happening with all of their finances. So these couple of friends and I went off and created this database consulting firm and consulted for Deloitte and Touche and American Airlines and some wineries and Hewlett Packard and all these different companies dealing with their data.
This sounds like the American dream that you're having so far. There is nothing stopping Tim. There was something coming up that would impede or attempt to impede his American dream. And we're going to talk about that and how he earned his scar when we come back to Bearing Scars. Today's episode of Bearing Scars is sponsored by the Churchill Strategy Group. In today's complex world, your voice needs to be heard. From City Hall to the halls of the White House. Whether you're navigating local regulations, state policy, or federal legislation, Churchill Strategy Group's strategic insight opens doors, builds coalitions, and turns challenges into victories. Visit them online at churchillstrategygroup.com.
Scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
Welcome back to Bearing Scars. Today we're with Tim Kelley. He is the epitome of the American dream. From swabbing the decks in the Navy to being a top executive at Oracle to starting his own company and really helping to shape about relationship databases that we have nowadays. And it's the beginning of AI, and he really helped to create that system. He was one of the folks that were in the field. Everything's going great, Tim. You've got the company with your buddies. But this is Bearing Scars. There's always something that gets in the way. What happened?
I was cruising along, working with various people, and I discovered through friends that I had 2 detractors, people who were going around basically bad-mouthing me to anyone who would listen.
For their benefit or just because they were being gossipy?
Well, they didn't really stand a lot to gain from it. One of them was my brother. We were part of a community of people who like meditated and did workshops and stuff together. This is, Northern California. And I was actually doing well in that organization as well, as a volunteer. And he would go around and tell people that I really couldn't be trusted with power, and that I had all kind of psychological problems, and that, I looked good, but people needed to be afraid of me and this sort of thing. And that I was super controlling and all this. And obviously this is, leftover material from our unfortunate childhood experiences
right.
coming into our adult lives. But he went on like real campaign. And meanwhile, I think it was maybe slightly after that or something, there was a colleague of mine who was a woman who was a consultant, whom I had done a lot of work with, and helped her with her system. She created this whole collaborative system, and then she started going around telling all of our colleagues that I was a terrible person. And it left me with an interesting question in both cases, which is, what's an appropriate response? Mm-hmm. And there's no saying, don't argue with a fool. People won't be able to tell the difference. Yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, I don't think trying to do character assassination on them is the right response. I don't think that makes sense. And besides, these are both people I cared about. I didn't want to destroy their lives. Mm-hmm. And I eventually concluded that if I conducted myself well, including conducting myself with the people who came to me and said, this woman is trying to do, what is going on here? I concluded that if I behaved well and operated with high values, it would be hard for the accusations to stick. I ultimately managed to get out of both of those without having to defend myself, but it was very painful, and I didn't enjoy the experience at all, and it was a constant question in my mind, what do I do about this? What do I do about this? What do I do about this?
If you're willing to disclose or reveal, because it didn't have merit, what was she accusing you of? It wasn't anything later on be called a Me Too or anything, was it?
No, nothing like that. It was really ascribing very dark motives to me, both of them, very dark motives to me. Yeah.
And there's a certain point when credibility credits don't matter, because if people say things about you, there will be
if they say it enough, it develops its own reality. It actually happened a third time. I was in Israel, and I was giving a talk to an audience of out-of-work, middle-aged professionals. Mm-hmm. It was a very specific thing. It was a program called Restart, put on by a friend of mine, an Israeli friend of mine, where what they're doing is they're helping people who'd either lost their job or lost their appetite for their job when they're like in their 40s and 50s and like this. And so I gave a whole talk to them about purpose, which is an area of expertise I've developed from my various purpose crises. And I gave a big talk to them about purpose, and I talked about their purpose and how finding their purpose at that point in their life would be a very healthy thing to do and help them to, find a new career or reinvigorate their existing career. And they loved it. And I, got a lot of applause and stuff. I go backstage, I'm talking to my buddies who invited me to come speak, and they all suddenly gasp. And I'm like, what's going on? And what had happened was the next speaker, who was a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, went up. And in Hebrew, I couldn't tell what he was saying, basically threw me under the bus and was saying, there's California wacko with rainbows and unicorns, ha, 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 purpose, blah, blah, blah. And did a whole big joke at my expense. And my friends were appalled. And I said, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. You'll see. And sure enough, the audience didn't react at all. Crickets. Absolutely no response, which shocked him because he thought for sure he was going to get a laugh at my expense. But they had liked what I had to say.
Right.
And so he kind of, bump, crickets, and then had to stop and gather himself and start his talk over again because that was his the opening he'd selected, apparently.
Those experiences actually sparked something else in you, didn't it? To say, well, there are other people that are having these sort of confidence crises thrown against them because one reason or another. How did that sort of manifest itself into what you're currently doing?
Yeah, so part of the whole purpose game for me is, how do we build a better society? How do we upgrade what we're doing? And I've spent a lot of time working with businesses on their higher purpose and business leaders on their higher purpose, so that capitalism plays a better game. Right, that's more generally beneficial. Capitalism does a lot of good, and it gets a lot of shade that I think it doesn't deserve. There are flaws, for sure. And can it be improved? Absolutely. Should it be? Yes. Unqualified, yes. And so I've spent a lot of my adult career doing that. But in the last few years, I started to notice this other phenomenon, this whole cancel culture thing that's going on. Now, I understand why people feel motivated to do that. If you see someone doing harm in the Justice Department and the system not responding, people, it's power to the people, right? Take things into your own hands. We're not talking about jailing or killing someone. We're talking about maybe they don't get any more roles on TV, or maybe they lose their, CEO position or something like that because of the terrible stuff that they've done that they haven't been accountable for. I get that. That makes sense. But most of the time, that's not what's happening. Most of the time, people are having their lives destroyed over a single tweet or an offhand comment, or in some cases, nothing at all. Like they actually did nothing. Stuff got ascribed to them, or they got accused of something. It was never proven, and their whole life goes down in flames. And I realized that I had, based on my personal experiences and my professional toolkit, I could actually help with this. And these experiences that we've been talking about where people tried to cancel me and failed, I was like, there's something lurking under there. There's something usable in that. Because I didn't get canceled, right? The scars were earlier. The scars were from swapping text in the Navy after 3 years of electrical engineering at MIT. That was the painful one. And I thought, okay, well, what would it look like? How would you chart a path, the navigator thing, how would you chart a path from cancellation back to being a productive, useful member of society? Because these are people who have spent their whole lives developing leadership capabilities that are now sidelined. It's sort of like if you had a football team and someone screwed up the play, and then you say, okay, now you're benched forever.
Right.
As opposed to, well, you really, screwed the pooch on that one, pardon my Navy, and now we have to take you back, and you've got to practice, and you got to do this, and you got to do that, and you got to, apologize to your teammates and do better next time. No, there is no next time with cancel culture.
In football, if somebody fumbles the ball, a good coach will generally give them the ball back the next play or a few plays later.
Let's see if you can do better if you try again.
Right. To get them back into their confidence level increasing, as well as getting back into the game. When you are helping all these companies, all these large technology companies and large companies use technology to foster growth for themselves as well as their teams, as well as the mission that each company had, what was it that caused you to say, maybe I should do another pivot and pivot into helping individuals to overcome any sort of cancel issue, or companies helping to overcome any mistake that an individual within the company has made?
Well, there's sort of two answers to that, Michael. So one answer is that this looks like, to me, a miscarriage of justice, right? Now, there are some people, like Bill Cosby's a good example. We know Bill Cosby's guilty. He confessed on tape, right? There's no question. Now, should he be in prison? Well, he probably should be, but technically no, because he gave that confession under a constraint that it not be used against him criminally, right? That was the agreement. And so he actually legally, it's correct for him not to be in prison, unfortunately, because of bad prosecutorial stuff, right? But that's not his fault. That's the prosecutor's fault. And so he'll never go to prison, but he'll also never work again. And I bet you'd have trouble finding reruns of the Cosby Show on TV. That's all correct and proper. But there's all sorts of other cases where people did minor things or no thing at all, and their lives were destroyed. And the people who destroyed their lives, in some cases deliberately, pay no price for that whatsoever. And it bothered me. And so that's one answer. It's like, I don't think this is how it's supposed to work. The other answer, which is more personal and self-serving on my part, was just like, wow, here's this interesting market of, because I'm always trying to, when I do executive coaching with leaders, I'm always trying to inspire them to transform, like inspire them to become a better version of themselves. Well, no one has more incentive to transform than someone who's been completely sidelined. right? If you're in office or being a CEO and everybody loves you and it's going great, you actually have a disincentive to transform. You're being rewarded for being the current version of yourself. If everyone has told you the current version of you is completely socially unacceptable and not welcome in society, now you got some real incentive to transform. Mm-hmm. And the other factor, I said there were two, but there are really three. The other factor is no one else was doing it. If you're a canceled person, then you can go to a lawyer about defamation. You can go to a PR firm and they'll go sort of fight for you online. But there's no one who will actually chart you a path back to relevance and back to a better career. And I thought, well, there's a gap and a market. In marketing, they call this a blue ocean strategy, where you have the market all to yourself.
What advice would you give to, let's say you use Bill Cosby as an example, to a Felicia Rashad or the other stars on the show who are negatively impacted because now they're not getting their residuals? What advice would you give to Lisa Bonet, Felicia Rashad, and the other stars of that show?
Right. So being next to someone who's being canceled, you can be collateral damage, right? But people can start to make up stories about what you knew or should have known, and you can get canceled just for being too close to somebody, right? They don't throw darts, they throw grenades when they're trying to cancel somebody. So right now, the Epstein files, like if you're mentioned in the Epstein files, that could be enough to be career over, right? And it could be because you were in the office next door, talking to a lawyer or whatever. Who knows what you were doing, right? You could walk down the hall past Epstein and you could get canceled for that. So those people, they're in some ways ideal because they haven't actually done anything wrong, right? Or there's people who are accused of something, they go to court and they're exonerated, right? And they're acquitted and they still get canceled. I have clients like this. And one of the things I like to say is innocence is not a defense in the court of cancel culture.
Right.
It's surprisingly irrelevant if you're innocent. And as you know, the degree of offense doesn't really matter that much, right? So the person who was, exchanging emails with Jeffrey Epstein and cracked an off-color joke gets treated roughly the same as a person who was grooming 13-year-olds for him. And so there's no proportionality to it at all, and no end to the sentence. It goes on indefinitely. Once you're canceled, that's it. We'll lock you up and throw away the key. That's not how the justice system is designed to work unless you do something really bad.
Right.
There's an end point and you get out. And sometimes you can get out early if you behave well, right? And then in theory, there are problems to be sure, but in theory, then you're welcome back among polite society and able to work and contribute and stuff in theory. But in cancel culture, you never get let out.
Right.
You're not even released. It's permanent. What happens is that the cancellation is basically a competition of narratives. And so the competition is, as the listener, when I hear someone telling stories about you, I have to decide whether I believe that or not. Now, unfortunately, for this context, human beings make decisions with emotion and justify them with logic.
Right.
Which means I'm not weighing all of the facts the way a lawyer or a judge in theory would be. I'm behaving more like a jury does, which is I'm deciding, do I like you? How upset am I by the story I'm hearing about you? The more upset I am, the more likely I am to believe it. The more outrageous it is, the more it must be true. And so in that competition of narratives, I'm innocent and here's the proof isn't a compelling narrative, which is why it always loses.
Right.
You need a more compelling narrative than your accuser. And this is where everybody goes wrong, right? They default to either apologizing, trying to prove their innocence, or counterattacking. And none of those generally will work. Usually none of those three will actually outcompete the narrative that canceled you in the first place. So we have to come up with a narrative about you that's so compelling that people would rather have you back in society doing your thing than have you be canceled, those who hear it. right? And there's usually just a small number of people who are trying to cancel people, but they've got a really good narrative. And so this is what I do with my clients is we spend a lot of time constructing the narrative. And now there's a couple of rules about the narrative. One is it has to be authentic, right? If it's something that we just make up about you, it won't work. It's got to be authentic. It has to be emotionally compelling to you, because if it's not emotionally compelling to you, it's not going to be emotionally compelling to anybody. And it has to be not only about the past, actually it has to be very little about the past. Most of it has to be what you've learned, how you've grown, how you've changed, and the significant contribution you're going to make to society in the future, basically your purpose. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know their purpose, so they can't play this game, right? So you have to have your purpose in hand and a plan for doing something useful with it that you really care about. And if you add all of that stuff up that I just named in the right sequence, that's sufficiently compelling that it will overpower the narrative of the people who are trying to cancel you. Because now the listener has to say, okay, here's this terrible, upsetting story about you, but if I cancel you, now I have to give up on the contribution you're saying you're going to make to society. Mm-hmm. This contribution, which I believe, because I can tell that you're being authentic. Would I rather have you canceled, or would I rather have society improved in the way you say you're going to improve it? That becomes my choice. And if the improvement you're going to make is significant enough and you care about it enough and you're serious enough, people will vote for that.
Mm-hmm. You have to be able to, change.org was a big thing for many years. You have to be able to actually allow the change to occur. Because
correct.
If you don't
you have to be transformed by the experience.
Yeah. And I mean, as a listener, as a viewer, as an observer of individuals, you need to allow that individual to change what you think is wrong about them. Otherwise, all you're doing is throwing accusations. Nobody will ever be incentivized to change. And correct. All you're doing is creating two sides competing against trying to convince folks in the middle. And that's, I think,
and this is a big problem on the part of the cancelers, which mm-hmm. is if you don't give people a way to win, they have no incentive to change. I'm basically restating what you just said.
Right.
If you want them to change, there has to be a carrot there. Mm-hmm. And the ideal carrot is if you transform, if you learn from your mistakes, if you become a better version of yourself, then we will welcome you back with open arms.
And your process has been extremely successful. And we're going to talk a little bit about, when we come back to Bearing Scars, how some of your clients have been transformed. Obviously, we're not going to ask to name all your clients, but your clients, Tim's clients, have included presidential candidates, 3 presidential candidates, members of parliament, organizations that we've all heard of, large organizations that we've all heard of. When we come back to Bearing Scars, we're going to talk about some of those individual stories and how Tim has helped them to overcome, even though they're bearing scars. We'll be right back.
Tell me something good.
In the past few weeks, Bearing Scars has added more than 300 new followers on Apple Podcasts, and our Spotify numbers are spiking as well. We're already one of the top 10% of podcasts in the world, and we keep growing. The best way you can help the stories you hear on Bearing Scars to reach an even wider audience is to share our episode with friends and colleagues. We're growing, and people throughout the world are starting to realize that they are not alone in bearing scars. Sharing these stories will inspire others to understand they are not alone, and a scar is not a life sentence. Thank you for your continued trust in bringing you these inspirational stories of grit, grace, and growth.
Scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
Welcome back to Bearing Scars. We're with Tim Kelley, who's not only a thought leader in the mathematics field, in the computer industry, and one of the real folks that made the internet as useful as it is today for businesses as well as for individuals. Now he's transformed himself from that hard skills into the soft skills of helping people to overcome things in their past, things that the scars that they have, and helping them to heal. Tim, you've started a business, and in that business, you've had some pretty amazing high-profile clientele, including 3 presidential candidates, members of parliament, business leaders, the businesses themselves that may have to overcome something that one of the folks within their business has done. How have you done that, and do you have any fun war stories to tell that you're willing to tell of how you've helped those businesses to succeed and overcome.
Yeah. So I can't name the presidential candidates. The politicians really don't like to admit that they've worked with me. but the business leaders mostly don't care. Yeah, I've worked with people and organizations that have been canceled for all sorts of things, like, for example, a business that was doing business with Israel and got canceled for that, and then stopped doing business with Israel and then got canceled for that.
Right.
One that comes to mind is the governor of Puerto Rico, Ricky Rosselló, who this was in 2019. He was there through a bunch of, like, a financial crisis and one of the hurricanes and stuff, and really helped the island to rebuild. And then shortly before the 2020 election, somebody published a Telegram chat between him and some of his buddies, the kinds of things people say when they know nobody's listening. Right. And so that didn't go over very well with the electorate. And so there wound up being people camped on his lawn and huge protests and demands for his resignation. And he apologized and also had to resign. There was no way out of it. So, and he was ahead. He was leading for re-election and in very good shape. And so now then suddenly he's gone. He's out. So I worked with him. And it's interesting because some people go back into the thing that they were doing. I'll give an example of that in a minute. And other people find a different career. Right. So often the politicians, as you know, the path back into politics can be a bumpy one. It's possible. Right. But he elected not to go that route. So he wrote a book about his experience called The Reformer's Dilemma, which is excellent, and I strongly recommend it. And then we worked together on his narrative. He'd already processed a lot of the trauma. That's one of the phases of the process, which made my job much easier. We helped him with his narrative and helped him recontextualize who he was and what he was doing, and find other ways of manifesting his purpose besides being a governor. He also did a term in Congress. He was actually a successful write-in candidate.
Wow.
To become one of the Puerto Rico's shadow representatives to Congress, which is, I mean, when does that ever happen, right?
I'll tell you, it's very rare for a write-in candidate to be able to succeed. And I do want to point one thing out real quick, because you're mentioning politicians. I think it's important to point out that this discussion that we're having with Tim, I'm not a client of Tim's. We have no business relationship. It's just that as we got to know each other online, we realized what a perfect match his story and his advice is for our podcast here on Bearing Scars. So
this is only the second time we've ever talked.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. So I helped him kind of redesign his life and how he was going to have impact and how he was going to manifest his purpose, and what he would say when he was challenged over what had happened. This is a big part of it. Is the people are terrified of being ambushed and having their past used against them, having their scars used against them. And so there's a certain amount of kind of internal processing, but also a certain way of talking about it that people have to develop, so that when that happens, the way they respond defuses the situation and opens a path forward for them. Mm-hmm. So that was I was very proud of the work I did with him, and he's doing great now. Now he's funding research. He's actually starting a foundation to reduce the polarization in politics. I wish him well. I want to help.
Well, maybe the foundation logo should be Sisyphus, because
yeah, it's a tough one. And then eventually things will change. This too shall pass. And another one that's a very interesting case. That was a milder accusation, said things you shouldn't have said, which in politics, career ending.
Yep.
But I'm also thinking of a rabbi who got accused of sexual assault. And when you look into the situation at the facts of it, it's like, well, this woman called him up and told him that she wanted to have sex with him. She requested it of him. So the next time he was in town, he flew to another country and met with her. They had 2 sexual encounters. No penetration, apparently, because she didn't want it. And he's like, okay. The second time, she was on top at a party in front of people, and then went on Facebook, bragged to everyone. A year later, some trolls and some journalists convinced her that he had taken advantage of her.
Right.
And now she starts making all these accusations. And it was at a time when those same journalists and trolls were going after the whole organization that he was part of. And so they were trying to take out everybody. Mm-hmm. And so they went after him, they went after the organization, and basically, and I don't think there was anything malicious on her part, but if you know anything about how the brain works and how people respond to social pressure and stuff like that, she started to talk about it as a negative experience when she'd been very clearly talking about it as a positive experience for over a year.
Yeah.
And now he gets fired from the organization. They scapegoat him. People start accusing him of stuff. People won't show up to his workshops, and his income dries up, and basically his life is being destroyed over this event. And so he was someone else. Now with him, I had to do more work on the trauma, because social exclusion is really hard on people. We are herd animals, and being cast out of the herd is painful for people and frightening for people and traumatic. And people don't think about that as trauma. You think about being raped or shot or whatever, it's traumatic. Mm-hmm. So we worked on that. We helped him with his narrative, helped him with his purpose. Here's a case where once he had everything sorted out, he could start teaching again. And people started showing up to his class. Now he's teaching different stuff, right? He evolved as a result of the experience, and now his purpose is calling him to teach other things. And the accusations from the community died down. And some of the people who were accusing him started to show interest in talking to him. And now he's, traveling around teaching again. So here's someone where there really was a ramp back to something very similar to what he was just saying, basically same course, different content.
Right.
But that's not always possible. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned politics. Within politics, me personally, I'm never running for political office again, and I can't.
Right.
There are other politicians who can never run for political office again, regardless of their qualifications or anything like that, because there is their scar is too big for potentially other people to look past, which is understandable in some sense. In another sense, it's just there's a legitimacy to electability versus whether or not the person should be.
Well, politics is very unforgiving, as is spirituality, right? If you're a preacher or someone like that and you fall, there are some who can rehabilitate themselves, but it's hard to come back from those. Yeah.
How would a business who maybe has something happen within their organization, how can they, obviously post-incident, they can create new rules, regulations, and policies within the business, but are there any immediate things that a business can do to potentially overcome or mitigate the damage of something happening within their organization or from one of their organization's members?
Yeah. So the reflex is to fire whoever's been accused, whether it's true or not, and circle the wagons and try to keep information from getting out. That's the impulse. And I understand it's what's happening. If you understand how the brain works, that's the amygdala firing. It's this little tiny thing at the front of the hippocampus that is responsible for the fight, flight, freeze response. Mm-hmm. And so if you put someone under enough stress, their amygdala triggers. And first thing it does is shut off the cerebral cortex. Mm-hmm. So when people are afraid, they become stupid. And this is why people sell stocks right after a crash, right? Mm-hmm. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do, and their broker will tell them that. It's the amygdala firing. It's not a strategic thought. It's a knee-jerk reaction. And so companies are run by people. You threaten the company. The people running the company get stressed out, and they start doing exactly that, and firing people who've done nothing wrong, or refusing to disclose information that they really should be disclosing. If you want a good example, the whole Tylenol controversy is still taught today as a how-to handle. Now, I understand people are opening bottles of Tylenol, taking the pills, and dying. Mm-hmm. And the company was so transparent and so siding with the customer through that whole thing that it actually enhanced their reputation rather than degrading it. But most companies, when they're frightened, aren't capable of that level of transparency or don't handle it well. when they're trying to do it. So there are people who are, their expertise is that sort of crisis management, crisis communication stuff. While it's happening, what do you say? And that's not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is when that's gone badly, how do you get back into people's good graces when you didn't handle it properly? Or, also very common, you did handle it properly and you got canceled anyway.
And these aren't just surface or artificial solutions. These are, and as you talked about before, these are, let's work on you being the company or you being the individual to ensure that the decisions that you make are wise for you as well as the company.
It's not simply that the decisions that you make are wise, is that you become so much the best version of yourself. It's transforming from someone who either made a mistake or didn't, but either way got canceled, transforming from that person or that organization into a person or organization who is absolutely doing the maximum that you could for the benefit of society in a way that's truly authentic to who you are. And because of that, people are just going to get out of your way or vote for you to succeed rather than try to keep you out of the game. Like I've got a client who's a doctor who's literally awaiting trial for touching a woman's stomach during a physical exam that she scheduled and showed up at and put on the gown.
Wow.
And didn't say anything or object to at the time. And then days later, her family, when she talked to them, I didn't like how he touched my belly, whatever. They convinced her that he'd done something bad. And he's
think about how that is impacting society in general, because that doctor, the hospital or the accreditation authority for that doctor, clearly while this is going on, he's not helping other patients. He's not helping to save lives. He's on pause.
No. Even though there hasn't been a guilty verdict, boards are revoking his license to practice without a verdict. But sometimes, and this is the shadow of Me Too. I think that, Me Too is serving a very noble and important cause. And we have to admit to ourselves that it makes it easier for a false accusation to stick. Right? We get both. You can't get one without the other. And this guy's a perfect example.
I always tell people that there are three things in their life that they're super ashamed of, and they don't want anyone to know. What advice do you have to everybody about what happens when one of those three things becomes public or exposed?
Yep. The most important thing you could do about that is reconcile with it yourself. That is a personal, internal process, right? That rather than denying that this ever occurred or endlessly shaming yourself because it did, you need to make peace with the person who did that and be able to integrate that experience and talk about it and say, I'm not proud of that, but here's what happened. Here's what I did. And here's what I learned from that experience. And here's how I was changed by that experience. So you need to integrate it personally. This is counterintuitive. This is the thing that in the crisis, when this is happening, that seems like a complete waste of time. It is not. Because that's a prerequisite for you talking to anybody else about it in a useful, productive way. Once you've reconciled with it, which is very tough to do on your own, most people need help. Once you've reconciled with it, then you can come out to the world and say, that thing that got released about me, that is true. And here's what's true about it. Here's how it happened. Here's why it happened. Here's how I unconsciously and unintentionally created whatever it is I created. And here's how I have learned and grown and changed as a result. And with that learning, growth, and change, now I'm going off to do this. And that's the other thing, right? So the integrating it is the backward looking, but you have to have the forward looking too, which is to say, you can't afford to cancel me. Because if you successfully cancel me, I'm not going to be able to make this change in the world that I'm trying to make. And you'll regret that because you want me to succeed. So you need the backwards looking and the forward looking. And both of those are very, very hard to focus on in the crisis moment, when you're watching your career evaporate or society turn against you or the trolls win or all that other stuff, and watching everything you've worked for disappearing overnight, that's not people's first thought, but that's the path out.
What are, one of the questions we always ask folks is, what are their resilience routines? So while all this is going on in people's lives, what are 3 resilience routines that you do, Tim, or that you advise folks to do to ensure that they maintain their internal mental sanity?
Yeah. One that I think is very important is meditation. Mm-hmm. And so I meditate every day, no matter what, without fail, even if it's for 1 minute. All the stuff we're talking about is super stressful, right? Thinking back on your own scars is stressful all by itself without actually interacting with another human being. You can just remember something that happened to you and that can stress you out. All that's very hard on the system, right? It shuts off your immune system. It shuts off your digestion. There's all sorts of negative correlations with being stressed out, higher blood pressure, with being stressed out all the time. And so you need to do stuff that does the opposite of stressing you out. And that's some kind of focus, meditation or prayer or something like that, where you have a singular point of focus and you're holding it for a period of time that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And I think it's the vagus nerve or something. My wife knows this stuff much better than I do, but it's the relax response rather than the stress response. And if you stimulate the relax response over and over and over again, then your blood pressure comes down and your system relaxes. So in our society, we're fed a constant diet of stress and left to our own devices to carve out time, even if it's a minute, to do that. And the other reason in the context that we're talking about why it's so important to relax is to get your amygdala to calm down so you can think. Because you're going to need your brain to deal with this stuff. You need to think strategically and not just short term, but long term, and do stuff that's not going to make things worse and throw gasoline on the fire. And if you're freaked out and panicked and reactive, you're going to throw gasoline on the fire.
What are 2 of the other things that you do? Meditation, maybe one. What is definitely one?
Yeah. So another one I do is I because of all the purpose stuff that I've done, I hold a long-term focus. Okay. Which is I think very far in the future about the future I want to create, which is increasingly difficult as the society gets more chaotic and messed up, right? It's harder and harder to do that, but I still do it. So that thinking past today's problems to a desired future is another self-calming thing.
And is there a third thing, or really those 2 hidden?
I play mindless computer games. Minesweeper, Solitaire. Right. There's actually research showing that works to calm the system down. It's actually a calming strategy.
It's like Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance.
Exactly.
Did you ever get your pilot's license?
I did not. I have aspirations when I'm like 80 years old and have less to do of going and getting a pilot's license. So.
We've talked a lot today about your future, and you talked about the future of the individual. What do you, Tim, want your legacy to be?
The things that I'm working on that I'm swimming upstream against cancel culture, knowing that I may get canceled for it. Like I'm deliberately running that risk, and I'm writing articles about how the mechanisms of how cancel culture works, which are going to make some people unhappy. If I can blunt the negative impact of cancel culture, that would be a legacy that I would want.
There's a little bit more to come. Stay tuned for Scar Tissue.
Hi, I'm Gary Sinise. Our veterans put everything on the line to protect our freedom. We may never be able to repay them for their sacrifice, but we can show them just how much we appreciate all they've done. Please visit www.volunteer.va.gov.
Scars, scars, scars. Enjoy your scars.
I don't know about you, but for me, every episode of Bearing Scars has a nugget of information, a feeling, or a comment that really drives home the importance of the episode. In this episode, Tim stated that he hopes his work to help people change themselves after being the subject of cancel culture doesn't end up putting him into the crosshairs of those entities who profit from canceling people. How sad. By simply trying to help people change for the better, he fears he'll be targeted by those who don't actually want the individual to grow, for fear it would impact their influence in profiting from people's mistakes. To be clear, again, those in power who make mistakes should be called out for those transgressions. But we should want people to grow. We should allow change. We should highlight those who have learned their lesson and done better. If you haven't listened to all the episodes of Bearing Scars, I'd ask you to catch up on those which you haven't listened. Even if you don't like professional wrestling, the Matt Morgan episode is a true life tale of a man who overcame addiction. Or if you felt our Quiet Man episode wouldn't relate to you because you're not a business leader with skeletons. Or if you couldn't imagine the tragedy described in our Her Deadly Secret episode, I encourage you to listen. All of our episodes feature people who have made mistakes and overcome. You yourself have made mistakes in life, and you deserve the grace of your family, friends, neighbors, and society. We're all bearing scars. Let's learn from them together and continue to move forward with grit, grace, and growth.